Okay, same thing, yeah. For the this could apply to your parents or your family or friends elsewhere. So this is something we do all over the world. And I guess on the topic of parents, we do see a lot of people that are applying for tourist visas to go to the US on vacation with their parents who are here in Canada visiting their kids who are studying here, who are living here. That's great. One thing we do recommend though for parents that don't live here, they're just on visitor visas, is if they can think of it, when they're applying for that Canadian visa in their home country and they think they might want to go to the US, apply for that US visa in their home country too. Because when I look at a visa applicant here in Canada, I'm looking at their ties to Canada and what's going to kind of compel them to return to Canada. And so if they're visitors here, that gets a little bit harder for me to do because inherently they're going to leave because they don't live here. And so an officer, let's say they're from the Philippines, an officer in Manila might be able to better understand their situation than I would here because I'm not in the Philippines. I don't understand, what type of job they have or where they live. We do still interview people that are visitors here. That doesn't prohibit them, but it sometimes makes for a little bit of an easier interview, at least on the officer's end, for us to be able to understand the situation. Okay, so visa waiver program. This is a program for nationals of certain countries, a lot of European countries, some Asian countries that are able to go to the US for 90 days or less. Does anyone know if they're from a visa waiver program country? Japan, France, Germany. Okay. So if you're not aware, then your country probably isn't, but we have more information online about that as well, but I won't get into it too much. Okay, we went into this earlier. Is anyone here interested in ever studying in the US? Do you ever consider transferring to a US university or doing a master's in the US? Okay. If you are, it's probably similar to your process here in Canada to some extent. You apply to schools, you get in. Once you get into that school, the school is going to issue you a form. It's called an I-20. And it says, how much it's going to cost and what program you're enrolled in. And once you have that form, you can then set up an appointment to interview with a consular officer. If you're applying here, you'd come here in Toronto. We'd interview you, and if approved, then you get an F1 student visa, and then you go to the US with both that visa and then also that I-20 form. You take both with you, and the officer at the border will admit you as a student if you qualify. It's up until, again, the point of the visa interview is the same for Canadians. They would still apply to US universities. They would have to get into a US university. The school would have to issue them that I-20, and then they go straight to the border. Don't come to the consulate. We don't need to see you. You don't need to talk to us. You can just go straight to the border and apply for admission as a student. So J1s, this is an exchange visitor visa. Is anyone here interested in doing an internship in the US? Okay, maybe. That's kind of one purpose of travel that usually falls under this visa class. We're seeing a lot of people apply for J1s for internships in the US from everywhere in Silicon Valley to New York, whether it's 3 months or 6 months. We see a lot of different types of people going to intern. What you would do is kind of similar to an employment-based visa. You look for internships in the US. You apply to them. They accept you. Make sure you tell them I'm a foreign student, so I would need a visa to be able to intern for your company. And then what they would be able to do, or a third party on their behalf would do, is issue you a form of DS 2019. Like the student I-20, it's a form you'll then take with you to the visa interview. And then we'll talk to you, we'll talk about your internship, make sure you qualify, and then when you do, you get a J1 visa, and you take that and that DS 2019 with you to the border, and then they would admit you as an intern. Under the J program falls lots of different categories. There's summer work travel interns. There's people who do their residencies, who do postdocs. So this can encompass a lot of different things. I'd certainly recommend checking out our website if you're looking for any type of internship, fellowship, exchange in the US. Sometimes it falls under this category. And even if your employer does not really, is not able to issue a DS 2019 or able to sponsor you, there's third parties that can help them. So check out our website, and then inform yourself of it, and then when you're looking for jobs, make sure you can let employers know that, well, there are third parties that can help you through this process. Same thing for students and for J's, that baseline requirement that everyone needs to show they're not an intending immigrant and that they're qualified for this class of visa, they still have to show that. So we understand for students, you might go and you might be in the US for 4 years. We understand that's a long time, and so you're kind of abandoning your residence, but we need to make sure that, in this case, Canada is where you're gonna call home or where you intend to return to after your studies. But there's some leeway given there because we do understand it could be for an extended period of time. Okay, so this is getting a little bit into the weeds on J1s, but just so you're aware, if you go to do an internship on a J1 exchange visitor visa, and on that DS 2019, the officer has checked the box that the 2-year residency requirement applies to you, that means that before you could later in life go to the US and work on an H-1B or go on a work visa to the US, you need to fulfill that requirement. So that means you have to return to your home of residence. Canada is only your home of residence if you're a Canadian permanent resident. If you're a student or you're on a work permit here, it's where you're actually residing. Waivers do exist for this, but it's something just to keep in mind. If you ever get a J visa, determine whether that box was checked, and if it is, and if you determine you want to work in the US on an H-1B or on an L visa, which is similar to an H-1B, you would need to fulfill that requirement or get a waiver. Okay, so speaking of H-1Bs, we kind of brushed over it before, but let's say you graduate from school here, you're looking for jobs in both Canada and the US. You apply for jobs in both places, and you get a job with a US employer. They've indicated to you that they can sponsor you for an H-1B visa, so they file a petition on your behalf. When that gets approved, you would then apply for an H-1B visa at the US Consulate where you're located. If you're Canadian, again, you get that approved petition, just go to the border. You don't need to come to the consulate and interview with us. Couple things about H-1Bs. I think sometimes it's in the news. There's a limit on how many can be issued. So sometimes they get used up throughout the year. And so it is a competitive process. So just be aware of that when you're looking for jobs in the US and talk to your employer about that. And the residency requirement does not apply to H-1B. We know you could be in the US and live and work there for, it could be up to 6 years, but there's no requirement that you overcome the presumption that you're intending to immigrate. Okay. Okay, so Canadians, we have a couple here. The TN visa or status is kind of similar to an H-1B, but it's something that allows both Canadian and Mexican citizens to work in the US if they fall under certain, if they have certain skill sets. So we have a list there, I think. It's also available online. It's a lot of professional skill sets, so it can be everything from an accountant to certain types of doctors or teachers. And if your skill set falls under it and you have a job in the US, or you've been offered a job in the US under that skill, if you're Canadian, you just take your job letter and proof of your skills, so maybe a transcript, something that shows that you're qualified to work in that field. You go to the border and you apply for TN status. If you're Mexican, you would come to the consulate and apply for the visa, but we're looking at the same thing. So this allows you to kind of bypass the petition process. I don't believe there's a cap on them, or if so, it's really an issue, and be able to work in the US in a similar way that an H-1B is, with some differences. Okay, so all these different visa classes, the student, the exchange visitor, the worker, the TN, if you have a spouse or minor children, they can usually get an accompanying visa to travel with you. So just be aware of that. They can apply after you. We just need to make sure that you have that visa, you're in that status in the US, and they would just bring the birth certificate or marriage certificate to show the relationship exists. Okay, so we'll kind of just go through the basics again. If you're applying for a tourist visa, you can just go online and fill out an application and start the process to apply for a visa. If you're looking to study in the US, to do an internship, to work, you first have to get accepted into a school, get that internship, get that job, and get the required petition or documentation to then apply for the visa. Once you get that, you fill out the application form online, you're going to pay a fee, and then you'll make an appointment. And then we usually say it takes right now about a week or so to get an appointment with us. You get further into a summer, it might take us 2 or 3 weeks because it's very popular to travel to the US. But right now is actually a great time to apply. Our wait times are down a lot. So you come to the interview, you're going to bring the confirmation page that's generated through your online application. In some cases, you might have to pay a small reciprocity fee. You can look online beforehand, but some countries do. A passport that's valid for at least 6 months after your date of travel. We do this because we don't want you to have issues at port of entry, because the Office of the Border, if your passport's about to expire, even if you have a valid visa, they can turn you around. So we want to see that your passport is valid at least 6 months past the travel date. And supporting documentation. This is really documentation related to student visa applications, exchange visitors, but as residents here in Canada, if you guys are students, it doesn't hurt, bring your school transcripts as well, because we're kind of trying to establish, because we interview so many people that are not Canadians, they have some other status here in Canada, and so we usually need to establish what their status is here in Canada. So it could be you're a PR, bring your PR card, you're a student, bring your student permit, you're on a work permit, bring your work permit. And that just helps us understand what your situation is here better. You'll attend an interview, you'll talk to us, it'll be probably pretty quick, like a couple minutes, and we'll let you know right then and there whether we can approve it or whether we can't. And we'll tell you the section of law if we can't. And then you usually should get it in about, your visa, if it's approved, in about 5 days. And you can either have it mailed or you can pick it up at one of our locations. So for students here, if you're applying even just for a tourist visa and you're in kind of the science, technology, engineering field, bring your full resume with you, your CV. We probably will ask for it. If you forget it, it's okay. We'll probably just have you email it to us. But if you have it at the interview, it just speeds things along for us. Okay, that's our online. All of this is available online. You fill out the application online, you pay the fee, you set up the appointment. Instructions are there as well as links to where you can get started. You can also just Google US Consulate Toronto visas. So as I mentioned, try to plan ahead for your travel. Our appointments do fill up in the summer. If you think you're going to want to go to the US, set up an appointment now, even if it's for a tourist visa, and get that going. Usually we can issue, once we're going to approve the visa, we can usually get it to you in a week. Some cases can take months though. So we can't anticipate right now whether your case is going to take a week or a couple months. So just be prepared for that. Don't book any non-refundable travel until you have that visa and it's in your hand. Okay, kind of just going over what we did before. Those are our hours, and yeah, that's our website right there for additional information on how to set up the appointment, some of the basics. So with that, I'm happy to take questions. One caveat I'll just say is I'm happy to answer any questions you have to the best of my ability. If it's a very specific question to you, though, it's probably best answered either through emailing us, or if you have some time, maybe I can just talk to you separately. I can't really speak to any prior cases you might have had. I don't have everything in front of me, and I don't want to do that in public either. So with that, if there's any questions. No? Yeah.
If a student wants to go abroad to go shopping in Buffalo, and they apply for they go to the US visa, a lot of my students are getting denied because they don't know where they'll be staying when they go to Buffalo. And that's one question that they're asked, where will you be staying? Well, students don't know Buffalo, and they don't know hotels over there. So what would you suggest to a student that's sitting in here that would like to go shopping for a weekend with their friends to Buffalo?
Sure. This is for a visa interview, not at port of entry, right? Okay. So we do ask people, why do you want to go to the U.S.? So we get some context of what their plan is. Where are you trying to do? It's not necessarily a reason for us to refuse a visa, though. So I can't speak to kind of a few cases or even one case in particular, but we certainly understand that if a student wants to go to Buffalo, they might just go for the day. They might not even stay there. If they are in Windsor and they want to go to Detroit, we know it might just be a day trip. So we're pretty understanding of the cross-border travel, and that alone would unlikely be a reason for being refused. We don't want people to book hotels before they have the visa in hand. We don't want people to make travel plans before they have the visa in hand. So we have zero expectation that people are going to be making extensive travel plans to the U.S. Before that interview. We simply ask purpose of travel so we can kind of understand, put that piece together for the whole situation when we're looking at it. Yeah?
when you apply for a job in the States, one of the questions is, are you legally eligible to work in the United States? As a Canadian, can you say yes?
Yeah, I mean, you're applying for a job and the employer's asking you that?
Yeah, that's a typical question we get at these sessions. Basically, if you're in a NAFTA field, if you check out our NAFTA professions, if you have a field of study in one of those, then you can say yes, because all they simply need to do is a job offer. But if it's not a NAFTA related field, then you have to answer no, because then they want to know if they need to petition for you. And some employers are not willing to go that extra step. So that's why they ask that question.
Okay. So yeah, the list is over there. It's online as well too, so you can check whether your skills on it. And then, like Althea said, if it's not, then the petitioner would have to file something like an H-1B for you. So good question though. I didn't actually know they asked that.
Or the H-1Bs, how long does that take?
Well, it really varies because we don't control the early part of the process. So you can get, let's say you get a job and your employer indicates that they want to file for an H-1B for you, the petition. They have to file that petition with US Citizenship and Immigration Services. They're based in the US, they're part of the Department of Homeland Security. They would then have to approve that petition. And then once it's approved, then you come to us. So have you heard any wait times recently for H-1Bs?
No, because usually what happens is that the fiscal year runs from October to the following September, right? But sometime around April is when they would open up the application process for the employers to submit the application. And for the quota is usually about 65,000 H-1Bs worldwide, right? Worldwide, 65,000 H-1Bs are approved. And so basically it's usually kind of mimics the time that the students are graduating. So they have their transcript, they have their certificates, diplomas, degrees, or whatever. And usually once the application is submitted, it probably takes around the whole summer, because I know that the start date for all new petitions is October 1st. So that process will take place between April to through the summer.
So if I want to go to New York for 1 week, like what kind of visa I need?
You just want to go shopping or tour around?
Yeah, we have one week break here.
Yeah, it's just a B1, B2. It's a tourist visa. It's a tourism/business. And when we say business, that means like a conference, meetings. You're not going there to work and be employed. So yeah, that would just be our kind of the most common visa that we adjudicate every day. And you could go straight online, fill out an application form, which will then prompt you to create a profile, set up an appointment, pay the fee. So you could, potentially get an appointment in a week or two. What's that?
Duration.
The duration. So that depends on your nationality. So, I mentioned reciprocity fees, that some countries charge us more than we charge applicants, so we have to charge them a little bit more. The same goes for visa validity. So we give someone the same visa validity that their country would give an American. So the most we can give is 10 years multiple entry, and that's for a lot of nationalities. Some countries we give, what's that? India's 10 years. I think it's 10. Yeah, I think it's 10.
There's a travel.state.gov website.
You can enter a reciprocity table, and it will tell you not only how long the visa would be good for, and this is for a tourist visa. If it's a student visa or exchange visitor, they're shorter, and it really is specific to the program that you're going to do. Some nationalities, though, it can only be for 1 entry, 3 months. So do be aware of that when you're applying. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Yeah, that's okay. I think Nigeria is 10 or 5.
I'm not 100%.
I would look online. So we interview a lot of applicants from India, from China, and so I get very used to those reciprocities. Double check, it's probably 5 or 10, but I can't tell off the top of my head. If you go to travel.state.gov and you go into the search table and you just search reciprocity table, that will tell you all the visa validities for every nationality you want to know, and it will also tell you if there's other fees associated. Well, okay, and then we'll go.
For B1, B2 visa, will it be a 10-year visa that you would get being an Indian national, or will it be like 6 months and then you apply again and then you get another?
So
years and then you move
here's the thing with visa validity. The reciprocity table, the reciprocity we give is the starting point. It can always be less too. So generally, people are given the full reciprocity. In some cases, which for India would be 10 years. In some cases, because of some of our regulations, we have to limit it to 1 year. but it depends on the case, and so that really varies. But just be aware when you look at it, we try to inform people of that if it is going to be limited, but always look at your visa, look at the expiration date, because you just don't want to get turned around at a border or waste your time by going to the airport. Here, and then we'll go there. Okay.
So for the TN visa, all you need is a job offer.
You needed.
And then just apply it to it.
Yeah, make sure that you have a job offer for one of the skills that's under the NAFTA professional list, because it has to be one of those skill sets. So double check online that the skill that you not only have, that your background is in, your education or your licensing, but also that the job you're going to do is under that skill. They have to match. And you know, we rarely see a lot of TNs because, yes, that you go straight to the border, and our colleagues at Customs and Border Protection would adjudicate your application for admission under that.
So basically, we have a job offer from the US Consulate in an active field, and a very detailed letter stating your position, exactly what your responsibilities would be like. Then you have your proof of your Canadian passport if you're flying, or proof of Canadian citizenship if you're driving across the border, and usually asks for the degree. So you have to carry your diploma or degree in the field. And transcripts is a good thing too, so that they can see.
Yeah. You spoke about having your study permit if you're an international student. Are there any other documents that you needed to apply for the B1B2?
Sure. So people do end up bringing sometimes other documents related to either their employment here, or we don't really, the only things I would say transcript maybe if you're a student here, just so we can see how you're doing as a student. We really don't require anything else. If you come and we do ask for something else, we'll give you instructions for sending it to us. Resumes for the STEM students, for the science technology, we do want to see a resume.
Does that include like software engineering?
Yeah, that doesn't hurt to bring. Just kind of if you feel like you're in a science field, just bring it. It doesn't hurt. Sometimes that does help us, answer some questions too if we're just curious about your background. But generally, if you're a student here in Canada, we want to see your student permit. That's something that we will ask for right away. And you can bring your transcripts. We could ask for that as well, and that's sometimes helpful. Anything else? We try to not ask for a lot of documents for a tourist visa application. We just want to have a conversation with you. And the only time we need to ask for things is when the situation's not clear to us. So just come and be ready to explain your life here in Canada, what you're doing here, what your plan is, not only right now to go to the US, but what's your plan here in Canada as well.
When you book the appointment, you will be emailed instructions, and on the instructions, it will tell you what are the mandatory documents. The mandatory documents are basically the appointment letter, because you have to present that to the security guard so that they know that you have a purpose for coming into the consulate, a valid passport, the DS-160 confirmation page with a barcode, proof of your status in Canada, which will be either a PR card, a study permit, or a work permit, and then a photo if the one that you've uploaded when you fill out the application form online, because unfortunately that system accepts photos that are not always accepted for the visa process. So you could do a group photo, you can upload a photo of a flower or any other animal, and it accepts that. Or selfie photos as well. But when you come to the consulate, we will review the image, and if it's not suitable, we will ask you to. But those are basically the 5 things that you must bring, and then anything else is whatever you feel comfortable that will support your application.
The photo has to be notarized?
No, the photo doesn't have to be notarized, but it has to be taken within the last 6 months.
White background, and we just need to make sure your whole face is framed, and within the past 6 months. Yeah. And then one other thing to mention too, those are the things to bring, the things not to bring to the interview. Exactly. Cell phones, electronic devices, really come as light as you can, because I know it's an inconvenience and everyone has phones and they bring them, but unfortunately we can't let them in. So if you have friends that can then hold them, or just be prepared that we're not going to let you in with electronics, so that could slow it up for you that day. Okay, yeah. Sorry?
Like if you're applying with your study permit, does it require any certain months? Like
time in Canada.
Yeah.
The question was, if you're here on a study permit, basically, how long do you have to wait before you are eligible to apply for this?
Oh,
like
you can, I got it.
If you have like, let's say, 6 months or 4 months in your study permit, can you be able to still apply?
So anyone can pretty much apply whenever they would like. as you've seen, it's an expensive process. And so we always recommend that, people apply at the consulate when, they feel like their ties to Canada are strong, their situation here is established. If you've been here like a month or two, you're certainly welcome to apply. Just really be able to explain what your plan is, what your program is here, how long you envision being in Canada, all these types of things. So I'm not saying it's better if it's 1 month or 2 months versus 6 months or a year. It just goes into us understanding what your situation is here in Canada and what's going to require you to return to Canada. Okay, and sometimes that means you're well into your program. You're building your life here. Sometimes that's stronger, but sometimes people are very established when they first get here. It really varies depending on the case.
And the other thing to stress is that if you are refused a visa under that section below, which is 214B, it's not a permanent refusal. So most times, all times after the interview, the officer will explain the reason for the refusal and even give you a handout that explains it in more details. You're free to reapply, but we only ask, just because there's a cost factor and a time factor involved, that if you wish to reapply, make sure that something substantial has changed since your last interview. Okay? You're not applying like 1 week, apply this week and refuse, and apply next week. What has changed within 1 week's time? Relatively nothing, right? So,
just to build more, then we'll take the online if that's okay. So just building off of what Althea said, with that refusal, the 214B, people can reapply whenever they would like to. And as she mentioned, we wanted to see that something has changed, that your situation here is stronger in some way. So that can mean a lot of different things because everyone is different. So if you're a student here and you kind of just started and now you've actually graduated and you have a work permit and you're working here, that would be a substantial change. It could be you're further into your program. It really varies, but if not a lot of time has passed, we may ask, well, what is the difference between your last interview and the interview today? And it's not about purpose of travel or any of those kind of things. It's about your life here in Canada. So if you can't think of what would have changed since the last interview, you might want to wait until something has changed substantially. Okay, so we'll just do a couple and then we'll.
Yeah, okay, so the person wants to know how they can apply for 2 visas at once, or if they can do that.
Yeah, they can. It depends. Sometimes crew members, if you're a flight attendant or a pilot, they'll apply for a crew member visa and a tourist visa at the same time. Someone can apply for both, and that is the same fee. If someone can apply for a tourist visa and then also a student visa, they would have to pay 2 fees though for that.
And the process of that is because if they're going to an off-site service provider, they are only allowed to pay 1 fee. So they'll have to walk with the fee for the second visa, and we would take it at the time of the application.
Yeah, so they would just pay the second one at the consulate. Yeah.
Got it. And also, the person wants to know how they can extend the visa if it's come to an end.
Okay, so this might be a question between the length of the visa and the length you're permitted to stay in the U.S. So a visa can't be extended. When it's expired, you come in and you apply for another one. You might qualify for the interview waiver program. You can also just come in as well and we'll interview. You have to set up a new application, pay the fee, come in. If this is referring to stay in the U.S., again, the visa just allows you to travel to the U.S. Once you get there, the officer stamps your passport, says how long you can stay. If you want to stay past that date, then you have to apply for that extension with U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services in the U.S. And then they would give you a receipt that says whether it's approved, whether it's been extended or not.
So for the visitor visa, we have to go to border, so we have to do online.
Sorry?
For the visitor visa, we have to go for border or online.
So if you're not Canadian, you would apply for a U.S. visa. You start by going online and you fill out an application form. You then create a profile to make an appointment. You pay the fee, and then you come see me or one of my colleagues, and we'll interview you, and then we'll let you know right then and there whether it's approved or not. And then you can go to the border once you have the visa. If you're Canadian, or if you're one of the countries that's a visa waiver program country, and you just want to go for tourism, you just go.
Is Sri Lanka waiver?
Sri Lanka needs a visa for tourism, for that type of thing. Yeah, for everything. Right in the back, and then you, sir.
Question,
okay.
So you asked about the travel, like, you're not sure, like, where we stay.
So
what's the way writing the application?
So, I mean, you can put, some people put something as simple as, they're going to Buffalo. They put Buffalo, New York in the application. We understand you might not have an address that you're going to visit. do something that's kind of at least the region that you think you're traveling to, because we'll ask, and if things are, if you say to me that you want to go to Buffalo, and I see on your form you say you want to go to Guam, that's very different, and so I'm going to probably say, hey, what's changed in your travel plans? So again, we're not asking people to make travel plans before the interview. We actually don't want you to make any travel plans before the interview.
Yeah.
Just, a city,
on
state.
the DS-160 application form, they now have an option. If you're just going down for the day to do day shopping in Buffalo, you can select less than 24 hours. And then it doesn't ask you for addresses, right? But if you're going to go for a weekend, then obviously you have to do it.
Yeah.
I was feeling with yesterday, you were asking for the days, when you see the days, I would ask me about where you stay.
Yeah.
Exactly. So as long as it's more than 24 hours, it's going to ask you for a location.
So fill it out to the best of your ability. We know not every question, every aspect applies to everyone, and that's certainly one of them. Don't make the travel plans before you get it. Okay.
Do they fall under the same extensions as Canadians? So so now my student has their little hotel or one weekend, do they still get the same as we get when they cross the border? So if we're out, you get 200, if you're out, they can declare 700, so when you're declaring to get back in?
You're talking about amount that they purchase, or you're talking about customs?
Yes, so would it be the same as what a Canadian can purchase when they go across? Or is it?
That is a Canadian government question, and usually what they can do is grab it. They usually have these handouts.
Okay.
CDF, they would have these handouts, but my understanding, it's safe. It doesn't matter as long as they're coming back to their residence in Canada. But CDSA does have a pamphlet that you can pick up, and they would tell you how much you intend.
Let's say if you're a resident. Yeah, your visitor, it doesn't apply, but it is say for international, permanent resident Canadian if you are a resident of Ontario.
Yeah.
So my petition for permanent residency is over here at my parents.
Mm-hmm.
Should I apply for a residency visa? Because permanent residency is going to take like 5-7 years. So
I mean, you can, again, apply for a visitor visa whenever you'd like. What we just ask is what your current status is, proof of your current status. So if you're here on like a work permit or a student permit or a visitor visa, you have an application for PR pending, bring both of those things just so so we can understand the situation and what your status here is in Canada. So bring both in that case. If you have like a student permit and then your parents are also applying for PR, then you can let us know that.
I am in the case, so it's like a different scenario. So if I'm going within New York or something, so if you guys object, why I'm coming about because I'm already done in New York.
So again, we kind of want to establish like two things at the interview. Because in Canada we rarely interview Canadians. That means that everyone else that we interview are third country nationals. So they're here on student visas. They're here on work visas, they're permanent residents. So we asked to see some documentation that shows that you're legally in Canada. That kind of goes to your baseline, what are your ties here, what's your situation here, so that we can then establish, well, what's going to prompt you to return. If someone's here and they are not in status, it's hard for us to know, well, first off, how are you going to get back in?
Exactly.
And that kind of goes along the path of issues with ties as well. So just bring what you have that shows your current status in Canada, and you're welcome to talk about or explain, what's going on for your future status. Yeah.
So that's a website.
Oh, let me just answer his, and then we'll go to you. Okay.
Is there any way to become like a dual citizen, like as a Canadian and Canada?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of becoming a U.S. citizen, for most people, it starts with first becoming a legal permanent resident, like a Canadian permanent resident. And similar to Canada, there's kind of two paths that goes. The two primary ones are either through a family-based petition or through an employment-based petition. So the family-based petition would mean, let's say your mom or dad, or that's not a good example. Let's say your brother or sister is an American citizen and they petition for you to immigrate to the U.S. That is a category that exists. It usually takes a really long time. But once you're given that immigrant visa, you go to the U.S., you become a permanent resident of the U.S. After a certain period of years, you can then apply to become a U.S. citizen. It varies depending on, and then employment-based would be similar to some of the programs in Canada. Let's say, usually what happens is a lot of people are in the U.S. on H-1B visas, and their employer files an employment-based immigrant visa for them so that they can become green card holders, legal permanent residents, and live in the US. There's different programs we have as well. There are investor programs, but that's kind of the most common route that people go on the employment side. So you would usually get legal permanent residence first, and then after a certain period of years, you can apply for US citizenship. And as far as the US is concerned, people can hold dual nationality. You know, we don't, it doesn't, you know, we don't care how many different passports you hold or nationalities you have. Really, the only thing we ask is that you enter and exit the US on your US passport. And if there's any claim to US citizenship early on in life, it would mean probably that one of your parents is an American. And that would be a question for our American Citizen Services Unit, which we're happy to answer as well. Because if let's say a parent is an American citizen and that parent was an American when you were born, you possibly could have a claim to US citizenship. We just need to establish a lot of facts. So I would just recommend reaching out to us. You can get an appointment, come in and discuss it.
Does it have to be someone like immediate as a parent or a brother, or can it be like a grandmother or an aunt or something?
Yes.
Yeah, not for
sister,
for
husband, wife.
for petitions.
Yeah.
There are some cases where American citizen grandparents can potentially transmit nationality to someone. This is getting very into the weeds of our immigration law, and it gets a little complicated. If you think you have a grandparent or a parent that's an American citizen, send us an email, and they can't pre-adjudicate the case necessarily, but they can at least give you some more guidance getting into the specifics of it. And then you would maybe come in for an interview to establish everything. Okay. Yeah. Go there and then here. Okay.
Yeah, is there something about inviting your family or other people, like when you're on vacation to live? Maybe someone from your family in another country will be invited in, like, join you there. You're saying something about what do you think? What are the criteria?
So that's actually a really good question. It's something I should have raised earlier. When people apply for just a B1, B2 tourist, business, meaning conference type of visa, it's that individual's application, unless you're a child. Then you're applying with your parents, and you're obviously a dependent of your parents. So we're looking at your parents kind of as the individuals that have to qualify the family. When you're an adult, you have to qualify for the visa just on your own based off of your situation. So it's great, if your parents are applying and they say, my daughter's in Canada and we want to meet up in New York and visit, certainly say that and explain the purpose of travel, but they still have to qualify as applicants in the country they're applying for. Does that make sense? So an invitation is not something that's required or even really a term that we use. They could just say, yeah, I want to go to the US with my daughter who's in Canada, and that's my purpose of travel. Great, we've established purpose of travel. Now we're going back to that baseline requirement. What are your ties to your home country, and what is your reason for returning? So no one can sponsor anyone for a tourist visa. No one can say, I vouch for this person, they're going to return, whether they're foreign or American. It's just this individual's application that they need to qualify for on their own. That's for a tourist visa.
And the whole reason, well, not the whole reason, but one of the reasons we put that information in this slide is because we know for international students in particular, the parents come for the graduation ceremony. They may come sometime during the course to visit, but inevitably they will come for the graduation ceremony. And you're aware of how close you are to the United States, but they may be coming from some distance and not realizing the geography. So what we ask is, that's why we come out and say these things. So if your parents are going to come to participate in your graduation ceremony or to visit with you, and you think you may want to take them across the border for day shopping or sightseeing, then please encourage them to apply for their visas back home, because their chances of overcoming Section 214B are stronger in their home country than where they're just temporary visitors.
Makes sense. Yeah. Did you have a question still? Or?
So for the TN visa,
Yeah, so the TN visa it's a temporary status that you're given to work in the U.S. It is a good question. We had this at the last session too. And the question was whether an employer can file a petition on behalf of a TN employee so that they can become legal permanent residents of the U.S. And they seem to think that they could.
They
CBP.
They could, but there is a little trick to that, because under the H-1B, right? So if you're going under the H-1B employer, after about 4 years, H-1B is six years maximum, right? Around the 4th year, if the employer is really, really satisfied with your work, they can file the employment-based immigrant visa petition for you. And while that is pending, they can continue to extend your status as an H-1B holder beyond the 6 years period. And when the immigrant visa comes through, then you become a US LPR. The reverse is true for the TNs, in that once you, the employer decides that they really want to hold on to you, if you have to come back out of the United States into Canada for any reason, a family emergency, a family event, it is likely that you're no longer eligible to be readmitted in TN because of the immigrant intent. The immigrant intent applies to the TN where it doesn't apply to the H-1B. So yes, it's feasible for the US employer to sponsor you as a green card holder, but the fact is that you would probably have to wait it out in the United States until that process is completed before you can travel internationally and seek readmission in TNs. But you won't be allowed to be going back in a TN status. That's the issue. Whereas with the H-1B, while that process is in place, you can apply for advanced parole and come on out and do what you have to do abroad and then be readmitted in H-1B status. But that is not the same for TN.
And so we do sometimes, we don't see it as much because again, Canadians don't usually apply for a visa, but we do see some cases for, dependents who are not Canadians where they were on TN status and the employer then filed for an H-1B for them after their TN status, and then they stay on H-1B and go through that process.
So that is an option too, from TN to H and then.
So, possible. Yeah.
Yeah, as long as possible someone will travel to Georgia. I just want to know that during the vacation, can someone still work at the
So summer work travel is a very specific program, and you're asking about summer work travel program, and you're asking about
possibility of working there?
Yeah, you can. So we don't do a lot of the summer work travel
We don't.
here.
We used to, but the whole summer work travel program was revamped because unfortunately there were circumstances where people were being taken advantage of. So they just totally revamped the summer work travel program. So what I would best advise is to go to that J1 visa website that you probably have listed there, or it's on the handout with all of the different websites. So go there and click on that summer work and do your research there. But basically, yes, it is for whatever summer is for you. So summer for us here is from May to whatever. In other countries, Australia, whatever, it might be different times of the month. But students are allowed to go in and work in the United States during their summer vacation, but they must be going back to register for the next semester at their home school.
Exactly. Right? And so it could be a lot of different types of work. It could be anything from, working for a theme park or camp counselor kind of style type of work. And you would, just like you would for an internship, you'd have to be accepted into the program by a sponsor. They would issue you that DS 2019 form, and that is what you would use to come in and apply for the summer work travel J visa. And it's usually like a 3-month program that you do in the US. But yeah, check it out online. It tells you what options there are for the different programs and what the timing is for that.
Is there a minimum education requirement for the H-1 visa?
Yeah, it's for H-1B. It's usually a bachelor's degree. It's a skilled professional visa. TN2 is usually a bachelor's, and certain licensing requirements could apply depending on the field if you need to be licensed to do it. Yeah.
I had a group of students who had 1 week volunteer opportunity in the States. So they were in a hospitality program. They had 1 week volunteer to qualify for Congress in Washington, D.C.
Okay.
It was volunteer, but expenses were covered. It was a small, a token of association, actually. Is that, and they already had the tourist visa? Is that something they could go under that, or they need work?
I mean, generally, if it's for short periods of time, there's no remuneration besides just like incidentals and that type of thing. That's usually okay. The specifics of it, you can always, when there's any question about programs like this, you can email us, and we're happy to look at what the program is and kind of see what exactly they'll be going to do and whether it's appropriate.
Yeah, what we have to remember is that admissibility lies under the US Customs and Border, which is a different agency from us. So, so that, as Barbara says, that sounds like if you're going to be there for a week and if your expenses, you're just only getting expenses reimbursed and you're not actually earning an income, potentially that could fall under the B1 category. right? When you go to the port of entry, as with any visa classification, the final say whether or not you're in the right classification or if you'll be admitted and for how long, that all lies with the interviewing U.S. Customs and Border official.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, because I missed.
That's okay.
I'm from Kosovo, and I had a U.S. student visa because I've done my undergrad degree over there. And I also used to have a J1 visa from 4 years ago with the work and travel program.
Okay, yeah, that's actually what we were just talking about.
So yeah, so I'm studying like here, I'm doing the program here. And what would be like the best approach for me to get any kind of US visa? I really want to go there and like just, you know, visit.
So we recommend that people apply for the class of visa that is appropriate for their purpose of travel. So it really depends what you're trying to do in the US. If you just want to go shopping in the US or go for tourism, you would apply for our B1, B2. It's a tourist business visa, and the business side of that, again, is like a conference or a meeting, not working in the US. If you want to do future exchanges in the US, if you want to do future study in the US, sounds like you're very familiar with our visa process. It could be a student visa, it could be an exchange visitor visa. So just think about, well, what is my purpose of travel? And then based off of that, it would determine what what type of visa you should apply for.
Yeah, like my purpose of travel is tourism, but like in order to get that kind of a visa, I need like to have a job, right?
No, I mean, so anyone can apply for a B1, B2 tourist visa. You apply online, you fill out a form, you set up an appointment with us, you pay the fee, you come and interview. The baseline requirement that we're looking at is that you have ties in the country where you're applying. So we interview a lot of students. You don't necessarily need to have a job. We just need to see that you're established in the country where you're applying and that there are ties that are going to compel you to return back. So sometimes for students, I'm in the middle of a course of study and I want to return so I can graduate. That's understandable, and we see that all the time. And so it's not a requirement you have a job. We understand a lot of people don't have jobs because they're students.
So I don't need like to go back in my country.
No, you can. If you're a student here in Canada, you can apply for a visa in Canada at our consulate in Toronto if you're here in Scarborough.
Thank you.
Yeah. Here, then we'll go here.
I think the question was asked before, but just wanted to clarify. Say, for instance, you finish your program this coming April, and but your student visa expires in September. We wish to just go to the US to visit and come back.
Okay.
Is that frowned upon or?
No, what we're always trying to figure out is what the person's situation is and what is going to be their reason for returning. So we do see a lot of people, especially now because we're getting close to graduation and they're in a transitional place. People are certainly welcome to apply for visas, but sometimes when you're in a transitional space, you might not know what your plan is, and that's okay. I might not have when I graduated too, but then it's hard for us to understand if you're not really clear. So sometimes in those situations, maybe it's better to figure out what that next step is. I've applied to an internship, I have a job, I'm working right now, I have a work permit. We just need to be able to understand what the situation is and what your future plans are here in Canada. And if we don't know if there are any future plans in Canada, it's hard for us. It doesn't mean that you're across the board going to not be qualified. It's just we have to understand the situation.
I'm going to come back. Well, I've already put processes in place to apply for a postgrad work permit in Canada.
Yeah, you just have to be able to explain, what's the plan? Like, what are you going to do after graduation? And, we're certainly seeing a lot of people right now in a similar situation. We just need to understand that, what's your reason for staying here? Yeah, right here, yeah.
Okay, if you have a valid US course visa, that will expire later in the year. You want to renew. And you're in say for example, you're currently enrolled in a program, like second semester. What are your actual chances? I know you can't apply. What are your actual chances?
Well, first off, if you already have a valid U.S. visa, you could qualify for the interview waiver program. I can't tell you right now what you do, but I would recommend. There we go by it. Here we go. Okay. We have information here as well. If you've previously had a U.S. visa, a B1, B2 visa, and it's still valid or it hasn't expired within a year, and it wasn't limited or restricted in any way, you could potentially apply online, pay the fee online, and not even go to an interview. We'll review your application, but we might not need to talk to you. So first off, check online to see whether you even need to come into the consulate. I know it's an inconvenience and it takes some time, and so if people can avoid it, we certainly recommend it. Whether you would qualify for the visa, I can't speak to that. Same thing, whether you're applying here, your home country, any other third country, we want to see what are your ties here to Canada, what's going to compel you to return. So if you're a student, we want to know you're a student here, you're enrolled, you have a study permit, and just be able to explain if you have to come in for an interview, what you're doing here, what your plan is. So check online and see if you qualify for interview waiver. You may. If not, then you just come in for an interview. You do everything and then also come in for an interview, and then just have a conversation with us briefly about what you're doing here in Canada, what the plan is. Make sense? Okay. Okay. Oh, yeah, sorry.
Yeah. I don't understand one point. Like you say, we shouldn't make a plan before we go to the interview, or we have a visa for traveling. So how can I make a conversation with you?
So I'd say don't make any non-refundable plans. You could say, you know what, I really want to go to Buffalo this weekend. That's fine. Or I might want to go to Disney, or I might want to go to Chicago and see a friend. That's fine. Just kind of think about, like, well, what do I want to do? I'm applying for a U.S. visa right now. Where in the U.S. do I think I want to go? Don't make any of those flights, though. Don't book any hotels. Yeah. Don't book anything. I know it's different than some other countries, what the requirements are, but we don't want you to make any non-refundable travel plans. The visa application is expensive enough on its own. We don't want you guys to be out any more money than you already are. But yeah, just have a notional idea of where you want to go. Yeah.
As you said that the form asks for the address, so what can you write in that?
So yeah, if it's going to be more than the 24 hours, if you check that, it will kind of blank it out so you don't have to enter it. It could be anywhere. I want to go to Buffalo, New York. Just do your best to fill in the field so you can submit the application. Yeah, you could just put the region. If it's forcing you to put something, you can Google, like, where might I want to stay. Don't book the hotel, but say, maybe I'll stay at the Days Inn or something like that. That's fine. We see it a lot. Again, when you're filling it out and it's something that's completely different than what you're telling me, I'm probably going to ask you a couple more questions just because I want to understand what your purpose is. But yeah, do your best to fill it out. We understand that, not every question applies to everyone, and we don't, again, want you to make non-refundable travel plans without the visa. So here, and then here, and here, okay?
Yeah, doesn't matter how many semesters someone has studied.
How many what, sorry?
How many semesters?
How many semesters? No, I think the question was similar to that. Again, we're looking at what are you doing here in Canada? How well are you established in your program? Certainly being a little bit more into the program helps us understand what type of student you are here, but there's no requirement that you have to be X number of months into your program. It's not a requirement. We just want to understand what you're doing here in Canada and what's going to require you to return. And yeah.
Follow-up question. Does the visa have to expire first? Or
Nope. No, it's great, actually. If you want to apply before your visa expires, that way, you don't have any delay. That's totally fine. We'll cancel. We'll put cancel without prejudice on it, and that before we can send you the new one. But yeah, that's totally fine. Yeah.
And even a friend or family invite me to visit them in the US. So do they need to write a letter or something to confirm that?
Nope, that's okay. I mean, people come with them, and you can bring it, but usually we'll take your word for it. If you want to go visit a friend in the US, got it. That's okay. We don't need to see a letter. Yeah.
Sorry. How long, if I am granted this visa, how long would my passport be?
Oh, how long would we hold it?
Yes.
Good question. It can vary. You mail it to us. It could be like a week or two. Once we get it and we approve it, it usually should be out to you in about 3 to 5 days. And it can either get mailed to you if you select that option, or you'll pick it up. It depends. And then when you mail it to us, it's a couple days probably. Is that usually what it takes? Yeah. So let's say a week or two.
So we have an outside service provider that schedules our appointments for us and collects the visa application fee. I just want to reaffirm the visa application fee is an application fee, it's not an issuance fee. So if at the time of the visa interview the results are negative, if you're not going to qualify for the visa, that fee is non-refundable. To make that clear. And the reciprocity fee that we talk about, which is based on your nationality and reciprocal agreements, that one is only taken if the visa is approved. So basically, the first step is you go online, fill out the DS-160. The second, and print out the barcode confirmation page, right? The second step is to go to our, we just go back to that slide about the visa application process. The second step would be to go to our appointment service provider's website. They ask you to create a small profile, basically giving us name, date, place of birth, email address, telephone numbers, and what it's going to ask you to provide is a Canadian mailing address. And then select the Canada Post location where, should your application be successful, you'll be going to pick up the passport, right? And then, so after you create that profile, then you pay the fee, and then then once you pay the fee, you can see the appointment calendar for availability. You schedule the available dates. This is all online, right? And then part of creating that profile, they're going to ask you questions about if you had a previous visa before. This is to determine whether to show you the calendar to book an interview, or whether to send you instructions because you qualify the interview waiver program, and how to mail the passport into us. And you can generate a Canada Post label that you take to the Canada Post office, and you don't have to pay. It's all part of the $160 application fee. They will ship the passport. We provide the passport to them. They ship it into us. 160 US dollars. Right? So if you have the visa interview, when you come into us, as Barbara said, there's certain things that you're not going to be allowed to bring into the consulate. We have a security team there that will go through your bags and whatever else, and send you back out with your phones or key fobs or anything like that you bring with you. Once you come into the consulate, you into the waiting room area. There's 3 processes. The first one is what we call the verification process, which we just take the application and go through it with you to make sure you're applying for the correct type of visa, that if you're applying for a student or a work visa, that you have the correlating document, supporting document. The second step is where you would collect the biometric fingerprints, impress, and the third step is where you actually can.
Here, come up here and speak so they can. That's okay.
So it's where you actually conduct the interview. At the end of the interview, you are given three outcomes. The first one is the visa is issued. Here is instructions how to collect your passport back at the Canada Post location. The second one is if the visa application is not successful, and you're given an explanation as to why you were refused. And the third outcome is if we have to do any additional administrative processing, we may or we may not keep your passport, but from then on, we will be communicating with you via email. So make sure that you put your correct email address there, and check your emails and make sure that nothing's going into the junk box, because that's how, if we have to ask you for anything additional, we will be communicating with you via email, right? So basically that's it. And once the visa is processed, we ship it back out through Canada Post, and you are notified by Canada Post that your passport is ready for pickup, and you go to the pickup location. So that's the process in a nutshell. Okay. Yes, actually, well, not all of that is printed, but we have the steps that I talked about is on one of these handouts.
Yes. I know you mentioned earlier for like tourist visa, there's reciprocal, like validity 5 years, 10 years. Canadian visas typically don't go beyond the passport validity. That's not the case for.
No, so as long as the visa is valid for at least 6 months past the date of travel, we could put a 10-year visa and a passport that's only valid for 1 more year. What you would then do, that visa is still valid. If you travel in the future, you take the new passport and you take the old one that has the valid visa, and you're just gonna have to travel with both. We can't ever transfer them. We can't, so unfortunately, that's one reason to have a valid passport for at least a few years, is so you're just not carrying 2, but that's not a problem.
Any other questions?
It's funny you raised that point. If I was to renew one, then I'm sending in my passport. I have 2 passports.
Okay.
Visa is another passport.
Okay.
Right? So do I have to send both?
Yeah, send both in. Certainly, if, we would need to see the old visa, and certainly if it's valid, we can't issue you a new visa until we cancel the old one, because someone can't hold 2 of the same visa.
Right.
Yeah. Yep. Right. Good question. Yeah.
Most of the rejection reason is just one that says that we do not find it, like an appropriate reason that we're traveling in the US.
Yeah, 214.
Specify anything beyond that.
Usually, what it will say. This is usually the most common refusal. It's 214B, and the main reason is someone was not able to overcome the presumption they're an intending immigrant. So when someone applies for a B1, B2 visa, they come in, and by law, we have to assume they're intending to immigrate to the U.S. until the applicant is able to show to us that they are not, and that they have ties in their home country, that they have no intention of abandoning. So the burden is kind of on the applicant when they come in. We have to assume you're intending to immigrate to the U.S., until you're able to show us otherwise. And you do that by showing like what your situation is in your home country or in the country where you're residing right now. So if you're a student, I'm a student here, I have a study permit here, this is my study plan, this is, you know, my plan after graduation, just being able to explain that. There is a so I can't tell you, you know, yes, this is exactly what you need because everyone's situation is so different. And I know that's a frustrating answer, but it really is. We interview hundreds of applicants a day and every single one is different. And so it's just being able to articulate what you're doing here and what's your reason for returning. We ask about your purpose of travel just to get context and understand, you know, why do you want to go to the US? But just be able to show, you know, how the life you established here is something that you intend to return to. Okay, and one other reason that you could be refused under this section is that you didn't qualify for the type of visa you are applying for. So sometimes if you apply for a student visa to go study in the US and we don't believe that you're a bona fide student, you can also be refused under this section of law. But the general reason when people are given this refusal is because they weren't able to overcome the presumption they're an intending immigrant. And again, it's not a permanent ineligibility. You can apply again. That's the situation that where you probably want to apply again only when your situation has strengthened in some way in the place where you reside. Okay. Yeah.
Does this also apply to the
For the TN? It does, but it's the same thing with students. And for the TN visa, the officer at the border is kind of making this determination. They always are. Even if you have a visa, we make that determination first if you need a visa, and we say, okay, you overcome that presumption, we're going to issue you a visa. You then kind of have to show the officer again at the border that you overcome that presumption because they can always turn someone around or, you know, and they decide how long to admit them for. So for a TN visa, you're going straight to the border and you're applying for admission in TN status. This section of law does apply, and so Customs and Border Protection will want to understand what your plan is. But like students, it's a little bit different. We understand that you're going for several years to the U.S. There's, you know, that you're not just going for a day trip, that this is a move of some sorts. So it's applied in the same way, but with more leeway kind of given to the situation because it's a very different purpose of travel. And so 214B could also be what you're refused if you apply for a TN admission or a visa and you don't meet the qualification. That could sometimes be the reason you get. Yeah.
For B1, B2, we need to show some financial documents or something?
No, we don't ask for that. I know some other places might ask for that. I mean, you're certainly welcome to bring them. I know I haven't asked for a single financial document since I've been here. And so again, it's not about the documents, it's just about being able to articulate your situation here. It's really a conversation is our preference for these interviews to be. They're really quick, and I know we ask questions fast, but we just are trying to get the whole situation figured out in about a couple minutes. And so just be able to articulate what you're doing here, what your plan is, and that's all we really ask. Yeah.
And the validation of tourist visa does not depend on the time period that you're planning to visit?
How long the visa is good for? For a regular tourist visa, it's usually just based off of reciprocity. So how long your country would give nationals of the US a visa. And then we can limit it, and that's in certain circumstances. We sometimes, in rare cases, do limit it for a specific purpose of travel. It's getting into very nuanced parts of our law, and we would explain that to you because you'd probably be applying for a very specific purpose of travel. But usually it's the full validity with the knowing that we could potentially limit it.
Yeah, and then once you're admitted, be very careful about how long you stay in the United States, because the length of the visa has nothing to do with the amount of time you're allowed to stay in the United States. Once you're admitted by the US Customs officer, they would let you know that you're admitted for 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, and you must depart in that within that timeline. Okay?
Would a B1, B2 visa be like already visa, for example, we will not like for transit? They will stand, or do we have to take a transit visa separately?
No, B1, so good question. Yeah, you do need, except for visa waiver program countries, to transit the US, you do need a visa. There is a transit visa called a C1, but most people, we just will prompt you to apply for a B1, B2 because you can transit on that, and then you also can just travel to the US on that. And it's the same requirements for a C1 as it is for a B1, B2. So if you don't qualify for a B1, B2, then you wouldn't qualify for a C1. And so we just recommend that you get something that's like a little bit more encompassing for your money, because you can transit on a B1, B2, and then you could also do other stuff on a B1, B2. Okay. Yeah.
So I'm very glad that you clarified for the students here about how long you have to be in Canada, because being an international advisor, we get this question every single day. How long do I have to be here? So I appreciate you telling them how long I have to be here. And I think what I got out of this workshop is you need to be honest. It's exactly like when you came from your home country to Canada. It's exactly like when you're going to go over to the States. And I think what happens is international students get nervous because it's the United States, and it's, you know, it's no different from coming from your home country to Canada. So I appreciate you putting it out there to the students.
No, and that pretty much sums it up. We just want to have a conversation. We know it's an intimidating environment, and it's kind of quick, the interview that occurs, but yeah, just be honest with us, and we're just trying to understand the situation. We're not trying to pry into your life. We're just trying to get like a little glimpse of what your situation here is in Canada and what will compel you to return. That's really just what we're looking for.
Any online questions?
There were, we answered some, but most of them were repeated questions, so we've answered them. Yeah.
I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. That's okay. That's all right.
I'm still not here as to how long we have to be here.
So there is no requirement. That's the bottom line. There's no requirement. There's no set time frame that you have to be in Canada to apply for a U.S. visa. Two things. We're going to ask to see what your status here is in Canada. That is something that we do ask for. So that's whether you're a PR, whether you're on a study permit, you're on a work permit. That's kind of the baseline. Then we're looking at, well, what's your life here in Canada, and how are you established here in Canada? So if you've been here for one day, I mean, certainly people can establish themselves very quickly, but that's pretty quick, you know? So what we're trying to see is, you know, what life have you built here in Canada? What is your reason for returning? And so what are you doing here in Canada? What is your day like? What are your reasons for continuing to stay in Canada? That's what we're looking at, and that's what we're trying to establish, because if we don't know what your plans are here in Canada, there's nothing for us, it's hard for us to understand what's going to compel you to come back to Canada and just stay in the US instead. And so that's what we're trying to figure out, is what life you've built here that you want to return to.
I've paid my fees for the semester. I've got to go and finish that semester.
Yeah.
I'm planning to take my opportunity for post-grad work permit.
Yeah.
All of those are really clear reasons that you're going to come back.
Okay.
Right.
And so we love it when students not only have a plan of this semester, but what is kind of what's the plan after that? We're not trying to put you on the spot. I didn't certainly know when I was in university what my plan was immediately, but what's the general plan? Where would you like to be? You know, that type of thing.
You know, like you came to Canada, so obviously you have a plan, you have a life plan. You made a decision to come to Canada to further your studies, and what are you going to do with that education? You know, what job opportunities you're looking for, and, you know, what are you going to do with that degree or that diploma? You know what I mean? So these are the things that when in talking, that's why it's very much an oral interview, and we don't really rely on paperwork, because, you know, this is your opportunity to kind of express, you know, why did I come here? Where am I going in life? What I want to do with my degree? Things like that. Where am I looking for job opportunities? And sometimes when you come here, and especially if it's for a longer term study permit, you might meet somebody and marry a Canadian. So then that changes your complexion, because now you're going to establish yourself here. Or you may have a family business that you have committed to your parents to go back and run for them because they're getting ready to retire. You know, all of these are reasons and part of this conversation that you have at the time of the visa interview.
Yeah, so again, not a set time frame. If it's really early, sometimes it's hard for us to understand the situation. If it's also at the very end of your time here in Canada and you think you might want to go home or you're not really sure, that doubt gives us a little bit of doubt too, because, you know, we can't read your mind, and if you're unclear about your future plans, then we're not going to understand it, and it's going to be really hard. So what we recommend is that when your plans here in Canada and your future plans notionally even are established, that is a good time to apply, but there is no specific time limit on when you should be applying.
Okay. So you have a business back in your original role, that you must go.
So that gets a little bit hard for us when it's a tie in a country outside Canada, because right now I'm just here, and this is the situation I understand. I was in, you know, Brazil before. If you had a business there, then I could understand it, but I don't necessarily understand it when it's in a different country. So if you if you think you're going to go back and work in that business in like a week or two, now might not be a good time to apply for a visa in Canada because you don't plan to stay in Canada.
Yeah.
So again, we see this a lot. We do see people that have plans of not being in Canada forever, but we just want to understand what at least the near-term situation is, and then also a glimpse into the long-term.
That's right. So you just feel like the best time in your period of studies when you can speak most effectively to your type in Canada.
We can never answer exactly what people want. We have to kind of give range just because everyone's so different. Yeah.
So if I want to travel in April, can I apply now?
Yeah, absolutely. Please do.
What is like? Give you enough reason that I'm going to be traveling in April because you like futuristic plans.
That's fine. I mean, some people, you know, have plans in September. They have a wedding they want to go to, and they apply now. We don't fault people for wanting to apply ahead of time. That's totally
a good plan ahead.
Yeah.
And then we also, this is something we also were asked to mention. You know, we asked people to apply early rather than later because in this summer we're going to be doing some construction at our building, and we may have to cut back on appointments or modify our workload somewhat. So it's best to, if you're going to be traveling for the summer, take advantage and apply earlier rather than later.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. No, we could have a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we clarify. So you don't need to go back to your home country to apply for the challenge.
No, if you are, you don't need to go back to your home country to apply for it. The only time, that might be recommended is if you are just here temporarily in Canada and you're not really living here. Then it's just, again, it's hard for us to understand your situation and what's going to compel you to return to Canada. If you want to go back to your home country really soon, then it's hard. Then you don't really have ties to Canada because you want to go back to your home country. That's okay, but you would probably be able to explain your situation better to someone in your home country than me because I'm here in Canada and I really kind of only understand Canada to some extent. It's, again, I know it's frustrating because I'm not giving you a specific time because there really isn't. You interview with an officer and they make a determination based off of the conversation we had, the information that you present to us. So it's not a set time frame. It's just for us to be able to establish, to understand your situation here in Canada, what the plan is here in Canada, and kind of what your notional plan is in the future, to establish what's going to require you to leave the U.S. and return, in this case, to Canada. Okay? Right in the back.
One of the questions we get a lot from our students is what do they need from the college to bring with them to the U.S. visa approval? So what documents do you provide for that?
The only thing we really ask for in some cases is a transcript.
Yeah.
There's student permit, definitely, a valid student permit, and the transcript. That's it. We really wouldn't ask for anything else. If you are one of the science technology students, if you are doing research and that type of thing, you can bring in a letter from your advisor. Sometimes that helps us explain it, but the transcript is sufficient. And if there are little things like that that we need, we can get that from you via email too. Yeah.
If my student permit expires in July and I get a transcript from the college that I'm going to be studying here since I enrolled to a program in September, would that will problem to my?
No, we do want to see that you have valid status here in Canada, and we want to understand what the long-term situation is. So I guess when you're applying for your student permits here, how long does that usually take for Canada?
To renew a
Right now it's about
a month or so.
Yeah.
So we understand that sometimes there are overlaps, but we generally want to see that there's some time left on the student permit and understand the plan.
Yeah.
But
if you have the receipt showing that you've applied for the extension, and as long as basically what we're also interested in is by the time you want to go to the States and come back, do you have permission to come back to Canada? And do you need a valid study permit to be readmitted to Canada, right? So basically we want to ensure that you have that in place. Yeah.
So you would suggest that I renew my study permit first and then apply for a visa?
That's probably right.
Yeah, that's probably the optimal situation, just so that we see what the plan is as well.
Takes me back to the question I was asking that some of us discover expired and maybe someone wants to travel in April. Is it wise for the person to use that study permit to apply for the visa?
Well, basically, it answers one question in that you have a study permit that's valid, depending on how long you're going to stay. If you're traveling in April, you're just going for a weekend, right, or a week or a month. as long as your study permit is valid, it answers the one part of the question, which is, do you have permission to come back to Canada if you enter the United States? Again, what the office is looking for is ties beyond your trip to the United States. So it's probably best to have a study permit that is for much longer period of time. But if you can speak to, well, you may or may not be coming back to school, you might be finishing, and that would be the last part of it. But if you're going to be coming back to school, then it would probably be best to apply for the renewal before you apply for the visa of the study permit.
I know a lot of people too are applying for co-ops or internships and that type of thing. Mention that, bring that up as well. Explain, the place, even if you haven't heard yet, what places you applied to. That's something that also helps inform our decisions about, your student status here, your intentions here in terms of work, study, all of that. So it's helpful.
We'll wrap it up here. So thank you so much for filtering us with the questions. If you came in late, there are handouts that they brought in for us, so grab them. If you have any questions on Canadian visa, well, no, we got two great advisors at the back that can help you, Maggie and Joyce at the end. And if you have the feedback sheet, please complete them and drop them off at the front or back. There's always orders and everything. Thank you.
Yeah,